So a recent poll came out in the UK, and there are others in all kind of nations, right? But the most recent one came out in the UK, where they did a poll with 3,000 participants, and 47% voted, quote, "The entire way our society is organized must be radically changed through revolution," end quote. Real wages have not been keeping up since the 80s. Inflation is not under control. Unemployment on the rise. Healthcare is crumbling. Education system is a scam. Genocide happening. Housing market out of control, and so on. The 2008 financial crisis, COVID, Black Lives Matter, the Palestinian movement have all exposed the bankruptcy of capitalism being unable to solve these catastrophes. And in each case, they chose to put the interests of profit ahead of human lives. While poverty is on the sharp rise, our governments rather send money to Israel and fund Ukraine. How can one not come to revolutionary conclusions in this state of affairs? All political parties have betrayed the working class in favor of profit and genocide. The handling of COVID was such a disaster. It's probably the biggest fraud in Canadian history. Out of $686 billion in COVID aid, only 15% went to the working class through CERB and Canada's Response Benefit Program. Now, this money that's gone to the working class had to be spent on rent and food, meaning it just went to the capitalists anyways. These are symptoms of a decaying system that needs to be swept away. And without anyone would dispute that the old world is dying. There's nothing really good to look forward in this old world. But the new one is also struggling to be born. So it's on this basis that socialist ideas are making a comeback. Year by year, we are left with no choice but to embrace revolutionary ideas as an attempt to get out of this hell. Contrary to what the defenders of capitalism spew, revolutionary ideas are not based on utopian illusions or just arbitrary choice. We don't just choose we want to do revolution. Instead, it expresses a necessity that presents itself as we fall in a deeper crisis, a necessity that reveals itself when all attempts at reforming and fixing the system continues to fail. So an analogy we make here to describe revolution, the necessity behind them, is by comparing them to earthquakes. On the surface, the Earth's crust is stable and unchanging. But beneath this thin layer of crust is molten rock at incredibly high pressure, looking for a weak spot to erupt. The crust is made of many parts, called tectonic plates, that float on magma and move in contradictory directions. So only by studying the Earth system in its totality, from the mountain peaks at the top all the way down to its core, do we arrive at a holistic understanding of how Earth changes, right? Marxist philosophy deals primarily with, how change happens. So from this, we understand that earthquakes are not an isolated phenomena, but a byproduct of a long, drawn-out historical process, a system of gigantic forces at play. And they're not destructive, earthquakes are destructive, but they also create something new, something different. It's a method of change which develops Earth's formation. So instead of moralizing, we should look at those dynamic laws and forces through scientific study and apply the same methods to studying human society so that we can uncover those dynamic laws and forces that are driving our development. Karl Marx dedicated his entire life scientifically studying class society and how it changes. There are many laws and forces at play, but a determining one is class contradiction, which we also use to differentiate between different types of societies. Under slave society, we had the slave and the master. Under feudalism, we had the feudal lord, the monarchy, and the peasant. And currently, under capitalism, it is the capitalist, a tiny minority that owns everything, and the worker that basically owns nothing. So when we say the working class, we're not talking about just people who work. We're talking about people who just own nothing. So it's almost like people who, like kids, working class, unemployed working class, people on disability programs, part of the working class. These relations, the relations between these different classes are fundamentally at odds with one another because one is the clear oppressor and the other an oppressed. But more importantly, the oppression has a purpose, and that is to make exploitation easier. So what capitalists call profit is nothing but the stolen surplus value produced by the workers who get paid a fixed wage. No matter how much you produce, you get paid the same thing. And if you produce nothing, you just get fired and you starve on the streets. So it's because of this, Yeah, so no matter how much money the worker makes, they can never really buy back the products they produce because they're being exploited. And because of this, capitalism is the only system that suffers from a crisis that we call the crisis of overproduction. This is what caused the Great Depression and the one that we are facing at the moment, where you have markets full of products that no one is able to afford or no one really asked for. And if they're not being sold, then the company doesn't make money anymore, right? And they lay off workers, they go into recession, and so on. Now, this is a very dynamic and complex process that I can't do justice explaining here, but the point is capitalism functions on exploitation. It relies on it to exist. And when workers rise up against it, they are crushed by the state through the police, military, and legal system. But that's not it. You know, this oppression feeds even more into the anger and resentment that's just building up within each and every single one of us. So don't be fooled by looking at people, you know, part of their routine, going to their 9 to 5 and say, you know, nothing could come out of this. Because it's quite this right before the storm. When we least expect it, all this pressure that's been building up will erupt into a mass movement of historic size. And we see this happening again and again, although the media avoids reporting on it. When there's a mass movement, there is a shift in the quality of consciousness of the workers, where they go from oppressed to liberators. And this was so apparent in the Palestinian movement, where it was just youth who have never been part of a movement before, who have no idea what politics even is, or like, that's a fucking genocide, I want to do something about it, and they began leading it. All the nonsense about pessimism and passivity is swept away with a mass movement, with changing the system being on the agenda, right? So similar to earthquakes, revolutions are a matter of if they will happen. We know they will. So it's a question of when. The shooting of the healthcare CEO by Luigi expressed the new heights of anger against the dysfunctional healthcare system in the US. The doctors and equipments are there, but thousands are being denied of health insurance, and thousands are also shot every year. Yet this one individual carried out this one assassination, and everyone just felt like represented by it. Everyone felt empowered by it. People on the left and the right all united together, like, you know, I don't care what Ben Shapiro has to say, you know, like, that CEO deserves to die. But the established media, the ruling class saw that as like, it's unjustifiable for the CEO to be killed. Like, there's no reason, there's no explanation for it. And they have no problem with thousands dying because they can't afford healthcare. So this is kind of like the bourgeois morality that we are dealing with. Likewise, cops murder people every day, but the one killing of George Floyd ignited the largest movement in U.S. history against police oppression and systemic racism. These events are what we call accidents that express a necessity. These events are what we call accidents that express a necessity. The straw that broke the camel's back, the point at which the pressure erupts. So right now, there are mass movements in Argentina, in Germany, in Serbia, and they are all threatening to overthrow the government. And yet you don't really hear much about it. Last year, we had also the Bangladeshi workers and students overthrow their governments. How many of you have heard about it? Not a lot. So there's no shortage of energy and movements going on, but there is a lack of revolutionary leadership that can correctly tap into this energy, fully represent it, and direct it towards ending the root cause of our oppression and problems. So just because revolutions are inevitable doesn't mean that they're going to succeed. Revolutions are not an automatic process. They require deliberate and conscious planning. They require organizing to succeed. Otherwise, there's really no point for us being here. If revolution is going to happen and succeed, then what are we doing? Now, all countries have a long but concealed history of class struggle against capitalism. Every single country, right? And in Canada, we have few here: rebellions of 1837 to 38, Winnipeg General Strike in 1919, the Quebec Quiet Revolution of the 1960s, and here in BC, everyone talks about BC, nothing really happens. In BC, we had Operation Solidarity, a general strike in 1983 that could have overthrown the government if not for the trade union leadership that sided with the capitalists and betrayed the movement. So why hasn't the revolution happened in the world? I can't really talk about that, but I can limit myself to Canada and speak on that. And it comes to two main reasons, but they're both also very interlinked. The first one is the post-war boom allowed the ruling class to give concessions and buy class peace. The second is a disgraceful betrayal of the working class by its own leadership. So Canada was able to push off revolutions through buying class peace. What does that mean? That means if the workers are going to threaten to overthrow you, you can give them some concessions, make their life a bit more bearable, and make it a bit more difficult to organize, right? Like something that you hear a lot is, why do you need to organize in Canada? Life is good, right? This is because workers have threatened to overthrow the state, and so they were given some concessions. And this was only possible because after the Second World War, there was the post-war boom. And so when the capitalists would give concessions, they're not really reducing their profits. The economy was growing very, very quickly. And so, they could afford it. So to tame the revolutions, they gave concessions. And in doing so, they bought up the workers and undermined their international struggle against global capitalism. Because across the world, it was just engulfed in wars and revolutions. But in Canada, because here they had a much better economy, they were able to isolate the workers and be like, we're better than them. They're different. They're barbarians. Now, these reforms and concessions created an illusion, right? It created a layer of reformist leaders who thought that if you just ask the government, they're just going to give you, right? Just give me healthcare, and they just throw healthcare at you. But this is just an illusion set, again, as I said, within Canada because they can just afford it. And now it's very different. It's not the case anymore. The global economy is suffering, and Canada in particular has the lowest projected growth out of all developed countries. And so the ruling class is unable to give concessions without also reducing their profits. And if we know capitalists will never, ever just give money like that, they will just throw it at wherever is most profitable. And for that reason, because they haven't been investing so much in the Canadian economy because it's not as profitable, they've been investing a lot in real estate. And guess what's the biggest Canadian industry? It's real estate. Like our economy is just a rentier economy. When I came to Canada in 2018, I was really surprised to hear people say, "Oh yeah, my homeowner is like." Instead of saying that, they say like, "Oh, my landlord, my landlady." Like we've gone a full circle back to feudalism. So there are many factors to take into account why a revolution failed, but a significant one is the lack of revolutionary leadership. One that stands unapologetically for the workers and does not deal with capitalists. A revolutionary leadership that understands where these concessions are coming from. Because if you're getting concessions, but you have a sharp analysis, you understand why this is happening, you won't fall for reforms. So this brings us to the task of the present moment, the task of our time. And I think Trotsky summed it up pretty well by saying, quote, "The historical crisis of mankind is reduced to the crisis of revolutionary leadership," end quote. The success of any movement, including revolutions, come down to the quality of leadership. Not any leadership, but revolutionary leadership. Liberals and pseudo-leftists, especially those who still defend capitalism, will blame the failures of the movement and campaigns on the workers. The latest example here is the American election, where Democrats are like, if you're not racist, vote Democrats. And then Trump won, and they're like, all of you guys are pieces of shit. You guys deserve the racism you get. They blame the workers, saying, they're all becoming right-wing. Okay, well, before they were left-wing, and now they're right-wing, and then left-wing and right-wing. Like, we don't understand anything here. And besides, who else would they vote for? Under the Democrats, we had the invasion of Ukraine, genocide in Gaza, increased unemployment, mishandling of COVID, rising inflation, unemployment, personal debt, worsening of healthcare, and so on. Trump was voted in because even while being a billionaire, at least he admitted that America is in a decline. And by doing that, he says, well, let's put America first. So, he admits that America is a decline, but then he puts in the reactionary advocates for the reactionary position of, well, let's do more American nationalism and just put America first and ruthlessly stomp on everyone else. We have come out of a period in which left anti-establishment figures and parties were on the rise everywhere in Europe and America in the aftermath of the 2008 crisis. These included Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, Syriza in Greece, and Bernie Sanders in the US. Now, as Max said, all of these guys failed big time, right? Many of them came to power and did absolutely nothing because their strategy really boiled down to vote Democrat, vote Liberal, vote NDP, Labour, whatever left party as the lesser evil. While the bankruptcy of their reformist ideas was exposed in practice, they were crying about workers not magically just fixing everything. And this is nothing but a cover-up for their political failures. So the reality is the so-called leftists have no understanding of social movements and limit themselves to blaming things when they don't go their way. This exposes their surface-level analysis, but also their moral and philosophical bankruptcy. They really have no faith in the working class taking power, and they have no understanding of the development of history, and so they're really pessimistic about the future. So in confusing and dark times, instead of being a beacon of light shining the path forward, they're nothing but just a pessimistic, demoralizing force. The workers have time and time again risen up, bursting with energy, enthusiasm, and hope, only to be led astray by their own leaders. For any movement to succeed, there are objective and subjective factors that need to be met. And the objective factors here are like, we've industrialized. We have produced a highly developed economy. We can feed everyone twice over. There's housing for everyone, but they are they're too expensive to afford and all that. And so when we push for, we're saying, we want a workers' revolution, we want a socialist economy, that involves free housing, education, healthcare, food, and all that. And our economy better be developed enough so we can actually provide those. The subjective factor, however, is the level of class consciousness of the masses. That first, and second, the quality of revolutionary leadership of this working class. So as Marxists, we believe that the working class has a fundamental role in changing society, and no one can really replace them. You can't just overthrow the government and bring socialism. You can't just do a coup and then put in a policy and then you have socialism. Instead, it has to be a genuine mass movement that entails a political as well as a social revolution. The political being the working class actually taking political power, and the social revolution being changing the relations between the capitalist and the worker. Once you get rid of that, you're no longer living in a capitalist society. But I'll speak on what a revolution looks like towards the end, and I just want to expand a bit more on leadership. Recently, there was the Canada Post strike, and it's also another example, again, at how leadership betrays the working class. These workers went on strike for around a month in the rain and snow across the nation right before Christmas. And when we were on the picket lines across the country, workers kept talking about going for a general strike if they could, and the other one defying back to work legislation. But then the government legislated them back to work, and the leadership just folded immediately. They didn't even put up a fight. But the workers were ready to fight, right? But the bureaucrats, the union leadership, the bureaucrats, they wanted to keep their comfortable positions and not risk becoming illegal. But had they been revolutionary, right, they could have done a lot of things. They could have at least tried. They would have prepared months, if not years ahead of time to go on strike with other unions, to raise the pressure and bring the labor movement back to life. There is no good and reliable leadership at the moment that can be trusted to lead the revolution. That has to be built. And it's precisely what we're doing here with the Revolutionary Communist Party. Leadership doesn't come ready-made, but it's built through struggle against the system. So many also on the left have turned the word leader into a dirty word, and for good reason, right? As I mentioned, the failures of the past can be found in the backstabbing betrayals of the leadership, who call themselves revolutionary. It was specifically those guys who drowned the struggle in blood and sided with the capitalists. They have no faith in the working class, and so they just handed over power to the bourgeois. But bad leadership doesn't imply there's no need for leadership, but instead it brings into question the quality of leaders. What and who are their ideas based on? What are their methods and aims directed towards? Because a river of blood separates the revolutionary leaders from the reformists. Leadership rises naturally within the working class, and we see this happening, in movements and all that. The Palestinian movement was a good example. Another one is the Arab Spring, where in a lot of dictatorships there was no possibility of a union, especially in a country like Syria. And so what happened was, when there was at the beginning of the revolution, people in their own neighborhoods would just be like, "Let's do something," and the person who just says, "Let's do something," is like de facto leader, whether you call them a leader or not. Always going to be someone who knows more, makes the call, has more connection, organizes others, and puts ideas forward, and people will naturally gravitate towards them. Second is we know that sorry. Okay. Second, since leadership is like basically inherent within movements, we should examine it. We should examine what it is and determine its quality. So, what the discussion on leadership can come down to is understanding the end goal. What are we actually leading towards? What are we leaders of? And for us as communists, it's really simple. If capitalism is exploitative, it's prone to crisis, and makes revolution inevitable, then maybe we should just overthrow it. Overthrow it and free humanity from the system. But reformers, by definition, have no end goal, and so they're forced to maintain the status quo. They just keep fixing. But what do you fix? The same thing. And so let's say the workers demand free education. The reformist will only fight for it, like half-assed attempt at fighting for it, if it doesn't threaten the profits of the capitalist. But as revolutionaries, we put the question in a different way. We say, if the demand for free education requires the overthrow of capitalism, then so be it. If we want to make healthcare truly universal, and the capitalists are in our way, then let's overthrow them, right? So being revolutionaries is not about just going around shouting "revolution, revolution." That's not what we do. Instead, it means we don't shy away from embracing revolution if that's what it takes to make housing and healthcare affordable. So as communists, our end goal is the end of capitalism, right? And that directs our actions. So, revolutions are inevitable, and they're just an expression for change. Second, revolutions will not automatically succeed. There are subjective factors that need to struggle and battle it out to win. And third, there will always be leaders who will influence the direction of the working class, so it's crucial to prepare ahead. This brings me to the role of the party in protecting a revolution from failure. Our party is based first and foremost on a set of ideas, and this forms the bedrock of our unity. It is the only guarantee of unity also during periods of heightened struggle, because if we share the same principles and we have the same analysis, then we're going to come at the same conclusion. There's really no disagreement there. This party, the Revolutionary Communist Party, was started off as a tiny group in a living room based on Marxist theory. It took around, I think, 15-ish years to grow to 400 members. But in 2023, we doubled in size because of, one, the crisis of capitalism is just convincing people to become communists. Like nothing convinces people of communism better than capitalism. And second, the correctness of our program. Yeah, so you can have the biggest organization or movement, but if it has incorrect ideas, then it's doomed to fail. Like it's not going to know what to do with this, with all this many people. But if you have isolated individuals with the best ideas, they're also doomed to fail because they cannot connect with anyone. So instead, we need a synthesis of both, a well-organized mass party with correct ideas. And as Trotsky said, quote, "Ideas without an organization are like a knife without a blade," end quote. So by collectively steeling ourselves in theory, we create a basis of unity on ideas so we don't split and fracture during movements. By analyzing and discussing strategy beforehand, we are quick to decide and mobilize for action during spontaneous movements. We're not caught off guard. Our study of philosophy is the absolute foundation of all of our action. And by mastering it, we master ourselves as individuals with roles to play in shaping history. We become conscious of what is unconscious, right? Our historical knowledge gives us a long view of history, which quickly reveals that there's always been a struggle between classes. This is not new. It's been going on for a while. And so there's a lot to learn from our past. We discover that everything is historical. Everything is in a process of becoming. And we realize that we're not alone, and many have come before us and attempted to change society. The same thing applies to economics. Right now, we're facing a crisis that's most probably bigger than the Great Depression of the 1930s. So by studying the war during these times, by studying the labor movement of those times, we can better understand and uncover effective methods of struggle and prepare ahead of time so we're not caught off guard. Sorry, I need water. Okay. By learning the lessons and failures of the past, theory becomes a guide to action. It becomes our shield and sword for revolution. So before we are effective, we first need to understand ourselves as workers, part of the working class, and also our enemy, capitalism, and the system that we live under, the party has to be international in character because capitalism is international. Think of like the Palestinian movement. One of the slogans that was repeated across the entire globe is Israel doesn't act alone, fight the ruling class at home, right? If the Palestinians overthrow somehow the Israeli government, well, then they have the entire US military coming right at them, right? So we need the US workers also to support the Palestinians. And so because of this, we see that there's a need to organize movements on an international, global scale. But this also, as I mentioned, proves that we all have the same interest. If we are able to create an international party where everyone stands for the same program, it shows that we all have shared interests regardless of our identity. Marxists consider the 1917 Russian Revolution to be the most important event in history. This was the first time the working class successfully liberated themselves by overthrowing capitalism. This impressive, the impressive aspect of this is at the beginning of 1917, the Bolsheviks, those who overthrew the Russian Empire, were only 8,000 people. And this is like, if you've seen the Russian Empire, it's massive. 8,000 people out of like 130 million during this time, somewhere around there. But in 8 months, between February and October of 1917, they grew from 8,000 to 250,000. That's over 30 times the size. This was a highly repressive nation in the middle of World War I with deep religious beliefs. They genuinely believe that the Tsar is good, sent by God, and is like a divine emperor that has the right to rule over us. So how did these Bolsheviks, who would later on call themselves the Communist Party, win over the masses? Well, they placed the utmost emphasis on correct ideas and tactics, maintaining a strict adherence to Marxist philosophy and a high level of discipline and self-sacrifice. And so, doing this over a period of 25 years, they built the best party the world has ever witnessed and boldly carried through the first socialist revolution. We spent so much time studying this revolution because the Bolsheviks did it best, and we have a lot to learn from. You know, organizing in Tsarist Russia is not an easy task. I don't know what's like a good comparison. What's like an oppressive country? I don't know. Like before Syria was overthrown, Syria actually learned how to have a brutal secret police from the Russians and the Germans. By the time of the revolution, it was known that one trained Bolshevik is able to single-handedly win over an entire factory of workers over to communism. And these individuals were called cadres. So a cadre, it's borrowed from military terminology. But the way we use it is a trained, disciplined revolutionary who deeply understands Marxist theory and actively organizes workers and youth to play a leading role in building the party and preparing for socialist revolution. Again, this is the importance of dialectically connecting theory and practice. The point of struggling or fighting isn't to just fight and feel good about it, and not to just do stuff running around with nothing coming out of it. Instead, we have to pick fights that we can win. We're not going to fight with the police for no reason. There's a time and place for that. So for now, what we do is we want to raise the consciousness of the working class to train as many of us in revolutionary struggle to organize as many workers based on solid unity, right? Principled unity. Now, we've done mistakes in the past, and we will continue to do so. That's not the point here. The point of the party is not to not do mistakes, but have a systemic approach at understanding our mistakes, understanding where we lack, understanding our strength, and then adapting, learning from that. Through struggle, the party becomes a memory of the working class. By systematically correcting, educating, and training one another, this one system is so global, so oppressive that everyone lives pretty much the same life. You go around the world, everyone almost lives like a 9 to 5, or like if you go to China, maybe 9 to 6, 6 days a week, which is even like worse. So all people have a shared interest against the system, which is why as communists, we boldly say we can go for an international revolution that overthrows this entire system. Thanks.